The harmonica was never meant to sound like this. It was a small, cheap instrument, something you could fit in your pocket, something nobody expected to change music. But one night in Chicago, it did. Through a guitar amplifier, that sound cut through smoke-filled clubs and spilled into the streets. People danced outside storefronts. Windows were left open. A city stopped to listen. This was not a singer chasing fame. This was a musician bending breath into electricity. In the early 1,950 seconds, that sound climbed to the top of the charts. Not with words, not with a chorus, just raw feeling pushed through metal and wire. It became the most successful instrumental blues record of its time and one of the most influential recordings American music had ever produced. And yet, the man behind it did not live long enough to see his legacy protected. At just 37 years old, he was gone. No farewell tour, no final tribute, no clear answers, only questions. How does a genius who shaped modern blues and laid the foundation for rock music end up dying in silence? And why did the world move on so quickly from the man who taught it how to listen? This is the story of brilliance, excess, and a sound that refused to be forgotten. He was born into separation, silence, and uncertainty. Before he could walk, his parents were already apart. In the rural South of the early 1,930 seconds, being born out of wedlock carried a weight that followed a child everywhere. Family decisions were shaped by shame, religion, and survival. And so, before his life truly began, he was passed from one set of hands to another. There was no stable home, only movement. As a boy, he learned to listen more than he spoke. Radios became his teachers. Late at night, when the house was quiet, blues floated through the air like a promise of escape. That sound stayed with him. By the time he was 8 years old, he had found a harmonica. It was cheap, easy to carry, and close enough to the sound he loved but could not afford the saxophone. He played it until it broke. Then he took it apart, studied it, fixed it, and played it again, over and over. Music was not a hobby. It was a way out. Trouble followed him early. Violence, prison sentences, broken households, these were not headlines, just daily reality. Adults disappeared. Guardians changed. Authority figures failed him. And by the age of 12, he was already living like someone twice his age, drifting, surviving, growing up too fast. In New Orleans, he played on street corners for spare change. In Arkansas and Mississippi, he listened to jukeboxes and learned from whoever would teach him. He slept where he could. He traveled the only way poor black boys traveled then, by hopping trains. The Great Migration was already underway. Black families were leaving the South, chasing factory jobs and freedom up north. He joined that movement alone, without permission, without protection. Chicago was the destination. It took time to get there. Weeks, months, sometimes longer, along the way. He played for meals, for coins, for respect. Every stop sharpened him. Every street taught him something new. When he finally arrived in Chicago as a teenager, the city was loud, crowded, and dangerous. But it was alive with music. Maxwell Street pulsed with sound. Musicians battled for attention on corners and in clubs. To survive, he washed laundry by day. By night, he played. And people noticed, not because he was polished, but because his sound already felt different. Chicago did not make him, it revealed him. And soon, the right ears would hear what the streets already knew. Chicago was ready for him, even if it didn't know it yet. In smoky clubs and crowded bars, musicians competed the only way they knew how, by outplaying everyone else. Nights were loud, tempers were short, pride was everything. And in that environment, talent did not whisper. It fought to be heard. At first, the harmonica struggled to survive in the chaos. Guitars cut through the room, Drums filled every corner. His sound was there, but it was getting buried. So he made a decision that would change music forever. He cupped the microphone in his hands, pressed it against a harmonica, and fed the sound directly into a guitar amplifier. The result was raw, distorted, alive. It didn't sound polite. It sounded dangerous, like a horn section screaming through a single breath. People stopped talking, then they started listening. What he created wasn't just louder, it was emotional. Each note bent and growled. Each pause carried tension. The harmonica was no longer background texture. It was the voice leading the band. That sound carried him into the studio. In 1952, an instrumental track built entirely around that amplified harmonica climbed to the top of the rhythm and blues charts. No singer, no lyrics, just feeling. It stayed there for weeks, becoming one of the most successful recordings the label had ever released. Success came fast. Hit records followed. Radio play exploded. Crowds grew larger and louder. Money flowed in. Cadillacs filled the parking lots. What had started on street corners now ruled nightclubs across the country. By the mid 1950 seconds, he was no longer just a sideman. He was a star. His records topped the charts. His name was known far beyond Chicago. Other musicians studied his phrasing, his tone, his timing. Younger players copied his style, note for note. Across the Atlantic, rock musicians were listening closely, learning from a sound born in Black American neighborhoods. On stage, he moved with confidence. Off stage, he lived fast. Fame fed his appetite for excess. The attention, the women, the cash, it all arrived at once. And no one told him how to slow down. For a moment, it felt like nothing could touch him. The music was selling, the clubs were packed, the sound he created was spreading around the world. But the same intensity that fueled his genius was quietly laying the groundwork for his collapse. Because at the peak of that success, something else was growing beneath the surface, and it would soon demand its price. Success did not calm him, it accelerated everything. As the record sold and the crowds grew larger, the chaos followed him off stage. Nights blurred together, arguments turned into fights. Alcohol stopped being a companion and became a crutch. Then came stronger substances, harder habits, and longer disappearances. The same fire that made his music dangerous made his life unstable. Band members came and went. Some left quietly, others left angry. Money became a constant source of tension. Trust eroded. And with each departure, the circle around him grew smaller. Violence became routine. There were street fights, club fights, confrontations with strangers who wanted to test him. Police encounters were frequent, especially on the road in the South. Beatings left scars that cameras later captured in still photographs. Injuries piled up, one after another, each one harder to recover from than the last. His body remembered every blow. By the late 1950 seconds, the music industry was changing. Blues was no longer driving youth culture. Rock and roll and pop were reshaping the charts. New stars emerged. The spotlight shifted. And suddenly, the sound that once ruled radio felt old to the industry. Record sales slowed. Bookings declined. The money that once flowed freely became unpredictable. The confidence that carried him through packed clubs started to crack. Depression settled in quietly, masked by bravado and drink. On stage, something was different. He missed notes. His timing slipped. The breath that once commanded amplifiers struggled to hold steady. Fans noticed. Musicians noticed. He noticed too, and that realization hurt more than any punch. He tried to keep going. He always did. Even after car accidents. Even after hospital visits. Even when doctors warned him that his body could not take much more. But he did not know how to stop. The music that once saved him could no longer protect him from himself. By his mid-30s, He looked far older than his years. Years of abuse had aged him fast. The energy was gone. The edge remained, but it cut inward now. Friends watched him unravel. Some tried to help, others stepped away. And as the world moved on to newer sounds, he was left fighting battles no audience could hear. The fall was not sudden. It was slow, relentless, and painfully public. What remained was a man carrying damage, physical, emotional, and spiritual, into a future that no longer made room for him. And the final chapter was approaching. By the early 1960 seconds, the sound that once defined American blues was no longer in fashion at home. Radio moved on. Record labels chased younger audiences. Blues, the music that carried the weight of migration, labor, and survival, was quietly pushed aside. For many artists who built that sound, there was no transition plan, no safety net. In the United States, clubs closed their doors, bookings dried up, respect remained, but opportunity did not. Across the Atlantic, something different was happening. In Europe, especially in England, young musicians were searching for authenticity. They studied American blues records like sacred texts. They learned every phrase, every bend, every pause. And when the chance came to see the music performed live, they treated it like history arriving in real time. Suddenly, the same artist struggling to book shows in Chicago was welcomed overseas. European audiences listened differently. They sat closer. They paid attention. They treated the blues not as outdated entertainment, but as cultural inheritance. Tours offered financial relief, but they also exposed a painful contrast. Abroad, he was celebrated. At home, he was forgotten. But distance did not cure his problems. Alcohol followed him across borders. So did conflict. Performances were inconsistent. Some nights were brilliant. Others collapsed under the weight of excess. Promoters grew cautious. Relationships strained. He did not feel understood. In interviews, he spoke of frustration, of feeling unappreciated, of believing the world had taken his sound and left him behind. That resentment grew heavier with each passing year. America had taught the world how to hear the blues. The world, in turn, reminded America of what it had ignored. This pattern would repeat itself for decades. Black innovators creating culture, global audiences embracing it, and recognition arriving too late. By the time the United States began to look back with nostalgia and reverence, the man who helped define the sound was already fading, not erased, but distant. And when the music finally slowed, what remained was not bitterness, but a legacy waiting to be acknowledged. When he died, there were no headlines celebrating a pioneer. There was no grand farewell, no national reflection, no moment where the country stopped to acknowledge what had been lost. His grave remained unmarked for years, while the sound he created continued to travel the world without his name attached to it. That is how history often treats its innovators. Long after his passing, musicians began to speak more openly about where their sound came from. Scholars traced the roots. Fans dug deeper. Slowly, recognition arrived, not as applause, but as understanding. His recordings were preserved. His most influential work was inducted into halls of fame. Lists were written. Documentaries followed. Films introduced his story to new generations who had never walked the streets where that sound was born. But legacy is not just about awards. It lives in every harmonica player who cups a microphone, in every guitarist who bends a note and waits for it to cry back, in every rock band that built global fame on a foundation laid in Black American neighborhoods. He was not a saint. He was not a victim. He was a human being gifted, flawed, and unprotected in an industry that consumed talent without teaching survival. His story is not just about music. It is about what happens when brilliance arrives faster than guidance, when success outpaces stability, when a culture celebrates the sound but neglects the source. Some stories do not end with redemption. They end with responsibility hours. To remember correctly, to give credit honestly, to protect the artists who come next. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect on what it asks of us. Not applause, not pity, just recognition. And if his music ever made you feel something, if it ever stopped you in your tracks, share that moment below. We read every comment. Some legacies fade quietly. Others keep playing long after the room has gone silent.